Managed file transfer. It's a subject that absolutely everybody seems to think is not in the slightest bit important. You say to them, you need to have some kind of managed file transfer solution. They say, no, it's not interesting, we don't need to do it. Until you say to them, do you know which data is flowing in and out of your company? Do you know where your data goes, where it comes from, and where it ends up? Do you also realise that you're legally responsible for it? And at that point the smile sort of slowly but surely melts away from their face, because you can see the reality of the fact that they realise that it actually is an important thing, and that obviously if you have a data breach now, it's too late. You can't do anything once the cat is out of the bag. It's way too late, and at that point, when either the police or the auditors or whoever else turn up, you obviously have an awful lot of work to do, a lot of explaining to do, and maybe a big PR exercise to retrieve your reputation out the gutter for your company. So this is why managed file transfer is important, because first of all, before you even set up a managed file transfer solution, what you need to know is the data that you manage on the day-to-day basis, where it comes from and where it goes. And often the IT department will get a phone call on a Friday afternoon and someone will say, we didn't get that sales report. And you're going to say, yeah, okay, which sales report? And they say, oh yeah, I get it mailed to me every Friday afternoon. Everyone in the sales department does. And you do some digging and you find maybe someone wrote a script 2 years ago, they left, it's been running, and no one's ever noticed ever since. And you'll find that there are hundreds and hundreds of instances of that where information is flying around within your company and flying in and out of your company, and you're not even aware of that it's there. And the big problem is, of course, is that you can be legally responsible for this. Now, the traditional approach, if you like, is this, and that is where people have, as it says here, limited logging and monitoring and security. They might have a log file produced by a script. They might know that they have 2 or 3 FTPs running and things like that. They may know that certain cron jobs are running on the machine. But what if they don't run? What if they fail? Often things are running for months and months. They suddenly stop because someone changes the password. Nobody notices until you get the phone call, my report didn't arrive, or somebody realises there's something wrong. So of course people also make simple errors. They might make a connection to a file system where they grab some files or some data and it looks okay, they don't check it, again it runs, and then somebody says, well, this has been running for a few weeks but we don't think it's right, we don't think it's capturing everything. Oh, okay then. They go back, they have a look and have another tinker around, think they've got it right, have another go. So as you can see from this diagram, it's very inefficient, it's very time consuming, it's vulnerable to human error, and of course when people leave and there's no documentation, it's very, very difficult, very time consuming, very expensive to put it right. So also, again, there is the legal problem that if the auditors turn up and they say to you, can you prove to me that you're PCI compliant? Can you show me where all your reports go for your credit cards? Can you show me where you store this? And of course you say, well, no, not really, because I don't have any log files and because I have no way of finding where this stuff is. And this is why managed file transfer is so important. And yeah, how can we actually manage this? And the answer is that you need to bring everything together into one place, and you need to make sure that everything is centrally logged and audited so that you know if you have 2 reports running that they actually did run on Friday afternoon, they actually did mail that report on Tuesday, and that if you have a FTP, that the files actually did arrive at the customer, because in some cases the customer may not even know. And similarly, if you have some kind of an FTP kiosk and you have customers or trading partners that can send you data, how do you know when it arrived? How do you know that they're not using it to send and receive files to use you as some kind of dropping off point, some kind of staging post? The only way you're going to find this out is to log an audit. And this is where managed file transfer comes in, because it creates for you a single point. Sorry, just 1 second. There you are. Mouse froze. Sorry. It creates for you a single point of control, and it allows you to log and audit every single action that happens, and to create as I say, a central point of control, and to be able to write and develop scripts in such a way that you know that you can give role-based access to the users. You have granular control over not just when the scripts run, how they run, and where various transfers go to and come from. And of course the big thing about this is this bypasses the unreliability of homemade manual scripts that are non-standard. Because if you're developing a single environment using a single language with single user accounts that are all controlled centrally, role-based and things like that, then if the auditors turn up, you can say to them, yeah, this is what we do, this is this connection, I can show you the last time it ran, I can show you whether it passed or failed, I can show you who logged into our file transfer kiosk the last time our customers were logged in, what level of access they have, and things like that. Okay. Now, as well as doing scheduled transfers, you also have ad hoc transfers. So that is, you may have a customer or another department that needs to just send you a one-off file. And again, this can be difficult because you might have to set up an FTP site, or you might have to provision a user and things like that. When you have a centralized MFT solution, you can even set up self-enrolling users and things like that, and again you have a full audit trail of when this happens. You can create users that have different levels of access, so that when they actually send a file, be it because it's scheduled or be it an ad hoc transfer, that some kind of action happens to that file at that point, what we call a trigger. So let's say you had a situation where people are uploading insurance claims, and you could have a program running a workflow where the moment that insurance claim was uploaded, it was taken away from the site. So it was a case of they can put it there, like IBM fixes, you can put it there, and the moment you put it there, it's gone. And the workflow can rename the file or move it somewhere else and that kind of thing. Okay, so MFT software, as it says here, allows you to control scheduled and ad hoc transfers, whilst providing, again, as I say, the centralized logging. And also you have a management dashboard, and the beauty of a management dashboard, of course, is when somebody comes to you and says what is happening, you can show them in a simple control center without having a lot of technical information where the data is going, which transfers work, when they last ran, and things like this. Okay. Also, managed file transfer supports what we call a workflow, and a workflow is basically like a script, and you can say when a file arrives, if it begins with the letter A, maybe rename it with a capital A, or rename it B something, or move it to a different directory. There are hundreds and hundreds of possibilities. You can also, for instance, as I say here, scan it with an antivirus engine or some kind of content management system. For instance, ClearSwift is a company that I've done some work with, and ClearSwift allow you to do what they call adaptive redaction. So you can configure your file transfer system so that when you send it a file, it'll automatically comb through that file, and if there's something in there, like say someone's credit card number, it'll automatically change it so that they only see the last 4 digits and the rest are X's, or something like that. Or if it contains rude words or contains something that may be commercially sensitive, it can automatically remove it. Okay, so all these things are possible within your workflow. The other thing that a managed file transfer should give you is role-based access, so that when you create a user, you don't have to manually say this user can access this directory or this user can only access this file. We're using role-based access. You can create groups and predefine roles so that everybody that you provision, either from an Active Directory or directly from, say, the Linux or Windows command line, will have exactly the rights that you want them to have. Managed file transfer should also support integrated workflow, which of course to you would be shell scripting. The only difference with the kind of integrated workflow that the integrated workflow that you get within managed file transfer is that it is almost self-documenting, and because every time that it runs it produces a log file, you not only have the documentation of the script itself, you have a complete record of everything that worked and didn't work as you're developing your script. So it makes the whole process of moving data around in your company far more efficient. Okay. The other thing as well is what we call data translation. It's difficult sometimes to write to write a script that, say, reads from an FTP server and automatically translates that data into a spreadsheet, or reads from a spreadsheet and automatically posts that information into SQL. But all this is possible within a workflow, and there are predefined widgets or tools that make this so that you don't need to be a programming genius. You don't need to reinvent the wheel every time that you want to move data from one place to the other. Another thing that's also very important is integrated alerting. So you can set your managed file transfer system up to send you an email or an SMS, or to write to your syslog server every time that for some reason your managed file transfer doesn't happen in the way that you think it should. Okay. Now the managed file transfer system that I'm going to show you in a minute, this is just an example, and this will be the same for, or should be the same for, any kind of managed file transfer solution, and that is that it supports data from multiple sources and multiple kinds of sources. So for instance here, the example I'm using for Go Anywhere, it supports, so I'm going to put my glasses on for this, it supports Amazon S3 buckets, AS2 database, various types of FTP, ICAP, web servers and the like. And what the reason why they're shown as being resources is that whenever you put them into a managed file transfer system, they become a reusable object. So if you use, say, FTP to your accounts department server and you use it 50 times in 50 different scripts, you only ever declare a link to that object. And what that means is that if you were to change the password, you change it once, and the next time any of these scripts run, they automatically pick up the change. Similarly, you can create environment variables. So if you had a test and development environment and you promoted your script from your test and development into your production, automatically all the links will change. So if you have a sort of dev FTP and you have a prod FTP, just simply by promoting the script or moving it in the environment, all the links will move with it. Okay. So that's where the real power comes in. And as I say, the other thing that is particularly powerful about using a managed file transfer solution is that you can easily translate your data from one format to another. So you can have, say, a Windows machine talking to a Linux machine, talking to a SQL database, talking to an MQ server, posting messages onto a web-based email solution and things like that. And you can do this all simply within the same script, using the same few controls. Are there any questions about this? Or nothing? Yeah. Okay. Data translation. Let's imagine you had an SQL database and you had a list of, say, employee records. Okay, and you had name, date of birth, address, maybe what they're being paid. And then one day that a manager came to you and said, I need a spreadsheet of this information. I just need this field, and this field for everybody in the sales department. Okay, rather than saying to him, okay, here, this is how you connect to the SQL database, you can say to him, well, tell me the name that you want and the fields that you need, and I will just send it to you as either a comma-separated file or as a native Excel file. And so the data is automatically taken out of the SQL database and put into the Excel database, into the Excel spreadsheet. Or if you have a message queue, for instance, and you subscribe to a message bus, you could take the message off of the message queue, and the data that's included in there, say for instance MQFTE, for instance, you could actually take the file that was contained in that message and then send it on or translate it to a text file or whatever else and then drop it onto another system. But the point is about this is that once you've written the method, you've created the workflow, this can run 100,000 times. It can run every 5 minutes if you like, it doesn't matter. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Yeah, and this diagram here from Go Anywhere is actually a really, really good way to explain it. At the bottom here you've got, for instance, various file transfers, FTP, various file system sources, web sources, databases, and the idea is effectively you can take any one of these sources and automatically translate that information so that you can post it to multiple destinations all at the same time. So you could take an FTP, perhaps someone sends you a file with 10 sales in there, so they've sold 10 toothbrushes or whatever else. You could post that directly into your sales database. So they don't have to know anything about SQL or anything about database planning. They just have to send you a spreadsheet or a flat file or whatever in a format that you can deal with. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
At the moment you are making a copy of the data.
Yeah, okay. It can be, yeah. Or you could even delete the original. You could take a comma-separated file and maybe replace it with an Excel spreadsheet and then delete the original CSV file if that's what you want to do. Yeah, and this is in general what we call workflow automation. Now, in simple terms, that the workflow is no different from a shell script, but the difference is obviously if you want to do alerting in a shell script, you've got to write something. If you want to send someone an email within your spreadsheet, you've got to write something. Whereas here, you've got pre-built tools allowing you to do this. So rather than having to spend a week writing a shell script, you've got one tool that you can drop in that says, I want to do this. Okay. Another big thing that is very important and people tend to miss is encryption. Most people these days use a website with an EV certificate like your bank and things like that. So all your data is encrypted in transit. However, and this is where a lot of attacks go on, is that once it's been sent with HTTPS, TLS, whatever, it drops into a text file on the web server. And often in a place where a hacker with not much knowledge at all can actually log into that web server, do a little bit of magic, bit of SQL hacking and things like that, and they can pull out that data, which is now in a completely unencrypted form. So data has to always be encrypted, both in transit and also whilst it's at rest. Now, a managed file transfer solution allows you to do this in two ways. You can either create what we call a workspace, and that is, it's like you've created a subdirectory in TMP. You do your work, and as the moment you finish doing your work, that subdirectory is deleted. Or you can create a what they call an encrypted directory that will stay there, but the information, as you drop it in there, it's automatically encrypted with AES 256. As you take it out again, it's automatically decrypted. So for you as a programmer, you don't actually have to do anything different, but if for some reason your programmer bends or it drops a report and it's there for a week, it doesn't matter, because even if someone's got root access to your box, they can't decrypt that. Okay? Similarly with compression, if you bring in data and you want to compress it, then of course you've got to write something in your shell script to enable you to compress and to decompress, and if you forget to do it, then it doesn't happen. Whereas here, there's a tool for it, and you can just say, I need this data to be compressed. Okay, how do I need to compress it? Again, once you've done this once, you can reuse these objects. So the idea is to cut down on duplication, to make things as simple as possible and as repeatable as possible. That makes sense? Okay. Also, as I mentioned before, an MFT solution should support a job scheduler. So obviously you don't need to be there to press the run button every time. It maybe runs every hour, every day, every week, whatever. Or you can run it using what they call a trigger. So a trigger would look at a directory or look at an FTP site and say, when a file arrives that's got maybe .txt on the end of it, I want you to do something with it. So it would scan that file system or that FTP server every few seconds it sees a file, and that then triggers an action, which then maybe runs a whole series of things, a complete workflow. A good example of this, I did a project earlier this year for a health insurance provider, and they have on their website publicly available basically blank health insurance forms. Well, you could get 100 blank health insurance forms and throw them all over the street, and apart from littering, you didn't really commit much of a crime. Whereas if you were to go into a hospital and get 100 completed health forms, and they've got something like Andrew has a heart condition or whatever else it is, then that could be a highly confidential and sensitive document. So what this health provider did, they had a trigger so that people could download as many of these forms as they like. However, once they completed them and submitted them to the system, the moment that it landed on the FTP server, the file was effectively pulled out of the public domain and moved into their private domain for processing. Now, if you were running some kind of manual FTP service, you would have to figure out a way to do this yourself, and it can be quite complicated. Okay. The other thing, of course, is user management. Everyone knows that, particularly within Linux, we all tend to be quite lazy and run everything as root. So we get all kinds of rights and privileges that we really shouldn't have, and we have the ability to, in some cases, look at an awful lot of data that we shouldn't look at. We don't want that for our ordinary, certainly for our ordinary users, and for what we call our trading partners, our customers. So Go Anywhere supports role-based access. So you can actually define within a group template or within a predefined role precisely what you want a user to access and when you want them to access it. Okay. This particular product also allows you to synchronize with an Active Directory or LDAP, and supports SAML authentication and free radius. So again, this allows you to pull in an awful lot of information that you already have to provision or to synchronize your users. Okay, and as I said earlier on, everything that you do, and this is the most important thing, is audited. So if you want to produce a report for your auditors, for the police, whoever, for the press even, then it's there. It's one click, it's out of the box, and it's all the evidence you need. So whether it's because you're debugging or it's because you think you've had a security breach or whatever, you need to be able to access this information. Okay. Now, as I said, I don't want this to sound like a sales pitch, but I just use this as an example because Go Anywhere is the MFT product that I am most familiar with. And this particular product runs on, as it says, a variety of platforms because it runs with Java. It pretty much will talk to any kind of storage as long as it has read-write access from the Java VM. Then it will talk to it, and you can have a situation where you could have a Windows box that has got connected to a Gluster node, to DFS, to a SAN, a NAS, whatever, and because it's a Java virtual machine, it won't actually know. All it will know is that it sees a readable and writable resource. Now again, on this particular product, all the configuration data out of the box is stored in a Java DB flat file, which, okay, it's designed just to get you up and running, but the idea is once you actually provision your MFT in a production environment, that you use a proper grown-up SQL database and that you arrange backups and security and things like that. And some of the examples I've given here, obviously Oracle, MySQL, but equally it can be Microsoft SQL and a variety of others. This particular managed file transfer system also supports clustering. So you've got the possibility of, if for some reason you have it running in your primary data center and that data center goes down, then you might want it to automatically to fail over to a secondary site and to carry on processing your file transfers. But again, of course, you also need a log record of this to know what happened. And this gives you a single point of control, all available from a standard browser. So that there's nothing actually to install on the machines that you're going to actually manage from. You just need Internet Explorer or Chrome or Firefox, and you can connect either as an admin user or as a trading partner. and you can basically do everything that you need to do just with either the Windows or the Linux tools that you have to hand. As I said earlier, when you create a connection in a managed file transfer system, and this should be any managed file transfer system, not just Go Anywhere, it's important that that connection is treated as a reusable object. And what that means is, of course, you define, I have FTP to 1.2.3.4, I connect as user root, the password's welcome123, or whatever it is, and it then CDs to /tmp. That information then becomes a single reusable object. So in future you say, I want to connect to sales maybe, and all that information is contained within that object. So if for some reason you need to change the password, or it needs to move to another machine with a different IP address or whatever else, just simply by changing the details in that object, every piece of workflow that uses that object will be updated without you having to stop it or anything. It will just, the next time that it runs, it'll pick up that change. Okay. Now this particular product, Go Anywhere, uses a scripting language that's just really for convenience for Java, is based in an XML format. But effectively, it's no real difference than, say, shell scripting or Python. It's just that it has a different syntax flow, and the XML is there for convenience. But it's not to be confused with XML that you write a website for or anything like that. Okay. Yeah, as I said before, it's a Java VM. And the beauty of this Java VM is that it provides all the various listeners that you need. So if you were to install Go Anywhere onto a Windows server, you might not have SSH installed, you might not have FTP installed, but you don't need to do that because the listeners are actually there in the Java virtual machine. So all you need to make sure is that basically the ports are open in your firewall and that you can reach them. And as soon as you start the virtual machine, people can then start to transfer files to and from the box. We talk about initiating and responding to file transfers rather than being a get or a put direction. People get very confused sometimes. They think that it's about whether you grab a file or whether you put a file, and it's not. It's about who initiates the transfer. So obviously if it's a machine-to-machine transfer, then in this case you would need the MFT solution to initiate that transfer, to send a file to your database server, to retrieve a file from your sales server or from your customer or whatever. And that would happen without any user intervention. That could happen either because you manually ran the workflow, or because it was triggered, or because it ran in a scheduled fashion because you wanted that to happen every half an hour or whatever. And again, in Go Anywhere, users are provisioned from a database, so that you can either manually create yourself a user, or you can connect to an existing directory such as Active Directory or LDAP, and you can provision those users. So the beauty of that is that it lowers the amount of administration work that you need to do to make this a kind of fully integrated solution within your entire environment. Okay, and as I said earlier on, security is also role-based. So you could create, for instance, a customer that you had, say you were a customer of Specsavers, for instance, you could create a Specsavers group, and every single user that you added to that customer group might be able to just do FTP. You may have an ITGilde group, and every member of that group can do, say, SFTP, FTP, and also HTTPS. And just simply by putting them in that group, they then have all the rights that they need. So it's about reducing the level of administration that you need to do. Okay. As I said earlier, and this is the case with many MFT solutions, is that there's no GUI, there's no agent for you to install or anything like that. It's purely a HTML5 web page. So as long as you can log in, you've got the IP address available, the ports available, then you can administer the product without having to install anything on your local PC, which obviously makes it really useful for the IT department, because you might not know where you're connecting from. You need to check if something's working, and all you need is a browser to do it. This particular solution also comes with various extra plugins which allow you to integrate much more closely with your desktop environment. So for instance, there's an Outlook plugin. So normally when people send emails from one to another and you say, okay, here are the sales figures, you might drop in there a 1 gig attachment and send it to 10 people. And one, you're going to really annoy people because you're going to blow up their mailboxes. The mail administrator is not going to be very pleased for the same reason, because it's a huge amount of traffic. And two, sending attachments like that is very, very insecure. So what Go Anywhere does is we have a secure plugin that allows you to post your attachments onto the MFT server and then only to send a link to the customers. So it basically says you have a file, you need to click here to get it. And when you click on it, it may give you a prompt for a password. It may say, well, you can only download this once. Or if it was, say, a special offer this weekend only, you sent it to 100 people and it expires on Monday morning. So I come back off holiday on Tuesday, I click on it and it says, sorry, that offer has expired. So it allows you to very securely control information that you're also sending by email. And it also allows you, either through Windows, through again through a browser-based GUI, or directly from Outlook, to send large attachments without blowing up people's mailboxes, and also being able to log who read the message, how many times it was downloaded, and also to put a password on there or to make it automatically expire after a date. Again, Go Anywhere also supports what we call a Dropbox replacement, and effectively there's no real difference between what Dropbox does and what various it's a Dropbox replacement, I should say, sorry. The Go Anywhere Dropbox replacement is effectively works in the same way as Dropbox, but the big difference is that the data that you store, you can either force it to stay on the server, and so they can only access it when they're online, or you can make it so that they can download it to a local drive, exactly the same as Dropbox, but you also have a complete audit trail of everything they've downloaded, including version control. And if you feel a device has been stolen or they've broken the rules, you can click a button and it's a one-click destruction, effectively, so you can just completely delete all traces of the Go drive from their machine, just with a single click. Okay. Now this is what the Go Anywhere interface looks like, and if I can get the screen share to work, I'll actually show it you in action in a moment. But as you can see, it's a pretty simple and highly configurable dashboard that just runs from a browser. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Right. Well, this is the main login to Go Anywhere. As you can see, it's a pretty uninteresting browser web page. Yeah. Just 1 second. Fat fingers this evening. Right. Now, this is the main, as I was saying before about a console, this is the main, if you like, flight dashboard that you see when you log into Go Anywhere. Now, it's a pretty standard look and feel to the interface, standard pull-down menus. These are all control role-based, and depending on the user that you log in as, now I'm at the moment logged in as root, so I've got access, or administrator, I've got access to everything. So all these various menu options are available. So I've effectively got the keys to the castle. Now, if it was that I set up an administrator with lower privileges, excuse me, then a lot of these menu items would disappear. Everything that you do in the tool is, you have a pop-up help menu as well, which so you can, if you get stuck at all, you can obviously look through and find out what you need to know, and it's context sensitive, so it knows where you are, if you like, within the tool. This front-end dashboard is also highly configurable, so you can drag and drop things around. You can edit these widgets or tools so that you can have the shortcuts that you want on there, or you can get rid of things altogether if you decide you don't want them. Okay. Yeah, there are about 30 tools in there pre-built, and they're adding more all the time. So you can add all kinds of dashboards which allow you to see effectively what is going on. Now at the moment in this demo system, we've got, you can see here that various people, myself, have logged in, when they last logged in, how they logged in, how they connected, and the service that was running and the user that did it. You can also see that this is a clustered system, so you can actually see that we have double the amount of services, if you like. So I can connect to this system using HTTPS AS2, so RESTful API, or also to the user GUI, or I can connect via FTP, SFTP, GoFast, which is a special fast file transfer. And you can see here that there are two cluster nodes, so there's MFT and MFT2. Now the reason that it's like this is that if the first node fails, it can automatically fail over to the second node. And because they're sharing a database, anything that you do on one side is automatically reflected on the other. It's also clever enough that if you are running a job and that job failed in the middle due to the fact that the MFT server went down for some reason, then the second server would see this in the database and automatically try to restart the workflow. Okay. Everything in this particular tool is, as I say, it becomes an object and it becomes reusable. So if I see something looking at my user, for instance, I can click, I can drill down to exactly where everything comes from. Similarly, if I look at my service menu, for instance, it says there's one person logged in. Okay, I can click on that and I can say, okay, who is it that's logged in? And it says here that the second server in the cluster has got a connection. Now I can tell you that that connection was here, what I did earlier on as a test, but I can actually drill down and I can see when they were connected and if they even sent any information. Now as you can see, I never actually did anything over here, so it's just an idle connection. All these screens are divided into, we have at the top area, we have an environment, if you like. So at the moment you can see that I'm logged into this demo environment. I'm logged in as root. And you can see, as I said before, in the dashboard area, what's going on. And up here you have your standard menu. Now, the way that Go Anywhere works, as I said earlier, is with reusable resources. So when you first set up the tool, you create a set of resources. So you say, I want a connection to a database server, for instance. When you define that connection, you say effectively how the server connects. So in this case, it's a JDBC connection to a Microsoft SQL server running at this IP address. Okay. If you actually want to test that, you just test the resource and it says, okay, a MySQL, beg your pardon, here's our connection, this it worked, and this is how the thing answered. Now once you've created this, you can actually just use this object in as many scripts as you want. And where it really gets clever is that you can also, because of the database and the relation, you can say to it, okay, where do I use all these connections? So you actually say to it, I need to know all the projects and all the workflow where this is actually being used. So I need to tell my auditors that every access that I'm making to this, in my case, MySQL database, and you can see straight away all the projects that use it are here. And it also tells you projects that it avoided and why and where various things are running. So if I was interested, okay, what does, for instance, this demo encrypt some data, what does it do? I click on it and I can actually jump straight in directly into the workflow project. I can see the source code. So as I was saying before, this is your XML, or I can see the actual workflow in sort of native format as you would fill it in as you went along. So you can see here, connect to a database, and there's my connection to my Linux MySQL server. So everything works sort of bidirectionally, if you like, so you can see from your resources what they connect to, and you can see from your connections which resources you're using. Similarly, you can also see every access that a user's made through the reporting. So if I was to take a resource and I wanted to create a connection to it, I can then look and I can say, well, I know I've already used it in this particular project, and I also know from the activity if it's been used at all in the last few days or few hours or whatever else. Okay, and you can do all kinds of filtered searches on this. What we call workflow, you would think of as a shell script. Okay. Alright, so maybe I don't know how much you want to edit out, but we'll just go back to the beginning of the story. As I said at the beginning, in a managed file transfer solution, the most important thing is to have the reusable objects and to be able to see where your objects are being used, how often they're being used, and what they're being used by. And being able to forward and reverse look up these resources and objects, and whenever you make a change for an object, it is automatically reflected in all the projects that it runs in. Okay. A workflow, as I said earlier, is effectively what you would call a shell script. We call this a project. Now, a project, as you see, you can either create a project using a drag and drop library, so you've got pre-made tools that you can just drop directly into your workflow, and then by filling out these various tooltips, you can tell it how you want it to behave and what you want it to do. Okay, now if I just show you, if I just come out of this, when you run a project, the most important thing is that straight away a project will tell you, in this case it's failed, alright, and it tells you why it failed. You also get a job log telling you exactly what happened, when it ran, who ran it, what it tried to do, and in this case why it went wrong. I know why it went wrong because there's no connection here for this. Okay, you also get a separate error log that you can either send to the developers, or you can look more closely to see exactly where the product failed and why. Okay, so you can either send this directly to the support people at Linema or to us, or you can use it to diagnose your own problems. Now, whenever a job runs, and hopefully I'll find one that runs successfully. Okay, now this job has run successfully, and it tells you that it's created a unique job log for it, which again that you can look at. You can see every single step that has been done, what it did, how it did it, when it did it, who ran it. You can also download these job logs, so you can just put them straight onto your PC, or you could mail them separately to someone else, whatever else, so that's also a possibility. Another really powerful function that's in here are what we call folder variables. So as well as being able to connect to something and actually having your resources from your library and your connections, you could also change this and put in something like a connection to my database. Okay, something like this, and this actual variable could be inherited from the folder that you're in. So what would happen if you created what we call a folder variable? You could have a variable in there, say called environment, and you could create an environment where one folder was called production and the other folder was called test. And the beauty of doing this is if you had in your workflow something that reacted to the logic of what is the value of this environment variable, you could actually pick up your project and drop it from this folder into this folder, and because this environment variable had a different value, it could also change all your connections, or it could make the script run in a different way. Okay, so that's running interactively. Another thing that you can do when you're developing your project is that you can run on as a debug. When you debug a script, every single step that you run through, you get a breadcrumb trail up here, and you also see your log building up. Also, if there are any variables that are created, you also see those as they're created, and you see the values change. So as you work through the script, you see everything that it's, sorry it's a little bit difficult because I have to scroll up and down, but you can see exactly what it's done. So for instance here it's created what we call a workspace or a temporary directory, and then it's connected to a database. If any variables have been created, you would also see them here. So If we move on to the next thing, and it should actually, okay, so it's now done a query, and it's done a connect, so it'll then tell you that you now have what we call a database row set here. So you can see that you've actually collected data and you've put it into what I suppose you would call is a complex array. As you work through, you see everything that is being done, and again it's a bit hard now at this resolution, but you can see your breadcrumb trail building up, and you can actually see from here the project as it worked down, and we're now up to the connect to FTP server script step, which is here. So you can see where you're in the workflow and what is going on and as it runs. Okay, now if I just run this to the end, we also get a log that is created. Now where it starts to get powerful is that these audit logs are collected, and you can actually see every job that is run, when it ran, whether it was successful, what went wrong. You can drill down into that job and you can actually see when it ran exactly what it did, the data that it sent, data it received, the resources that it connected to. And you can also, check the file activity, you can directly jump backwards into the project that ran this job so you can see what it did. You can edit it, and you can also control every aspect of the data that is flowing inside and outside of your information of your environment. Another powerful function that's in there are predefined reports. So for instance, if you were PCI DSS, so you needed to be PCI DSS compliant, or your auditor said to you, okay, tell me about all the SSL certificates that you have and when they're about to expire, you can create a predefined report, and this could actually be done within your workflow. And you can actually, there aren't any here, but you can actually send this directly to your managers without you having to do anything. So at the end of every week, they could automatically get a report in the audit department that says, hey, next month this certificate is expiring. Okay, certificates are also able to be handled centrally, so you can keep all your keys, all your root certificates, and all your private certificates in one place. And you can also see the details of what these certificates are, and again, who issued them, when they're going to expire, what the strength is of them, and things like this. Similarly, you can also keep key pairs in there. So if you're using SSH connections and you want to keep key pairs in there so you don't use passwords, those can also be held separately, as can OpenPGP key pairs for encryption and decryption. Okay. As I said earlier on, we have what we call a service manager, so you can manage how people can connect to this FTP box or to HTTP or whatever else. You can say, you can set upload restrictions, you can change the sockets, you can change the message that they will get when they log in and when they disconnect. You can configure to use explicit SSL, so you can also directly install your certificates and your keys into the connections, and you can also change the ports to connect. So if you don't want to use, say, port 21 for your FTP because you've got something else running on there, you can just change the port. These services are completely configurable, and you can create multiple. So if you had a company that had two identities, perhaps you had two brands within a company, you could create two completely separate listeners running on different ports that had different messages and different logos and the like. Okay, but the whole point about managed transfer is that everything here is in one single interface. You can provision your users, you can connect to your directory, you can control your encryption and your workflows without ever leaving the single tool. If you want to create a kiosk for your customers, you can also provision where users can connect and actually manage their own data. So for instance here I've branded this for Bluefinch, and if I just connect to a test user I have here, yep, this is going to connect, and you can see here again without any software I've got the ability to have a Google Drive type, G Drive type interface. I can actually put information in and just drag and drop it and upload it onto my server. Once I've done that, I've got version control, so I can see if there's any revisions, who created it, when I created it. I can share this information, so I can do collaboration with other people. So if I want to share it with the users in the group, I can send it to them. I can also copy it across into what they call secure folders, so I can use it elsewhere within the workflow and elsewhere within the system. Okay. I can also revert to earlier versions of that file if I want to. Within the dashboard as well, I can also set it up so I can see my own activity. So I can see that I've uploaded these files, for instance. And this, again, is all completely without software, and this gives your customers the control that they need, your trading partners, to be able to upload and download files and to access reports or various other things. Okay, yeah. Yes. Yes, if you want to. Yeah, you have various different ways of connecting. You can offer someone as simple as a FTP command line based interface if you want to, such as this. It doesn't have to be via this connection. It depends on what the service or the listener is. But yeah, you can share a WebDAV. You can talk to a RESTful API. You can send AS2 messages. It's pretty much as far as your imagination wants to go. Yes, yes, you can pull information, but yeah. Yeah, the only thing that MFT can't do, and we were talking about this earlier, that something such as BizTalk can do, is that MFT cannot, what we call, oh God, sorry about that, excuse me a sec, whoops, the microphone, I will kill that. Sorry, that's what you don't want, isn't it? Yeah, I want to turn that off, sorry. That was a really, thanks for that, I'll just power that off for a minute. It was a, sorry. Power off. Yeah, let's get rid of that. Sorry, that won't do that again. Okay. Hopefully I didn't wreck the microphone doing that. But yeah, the only thing that we can't do, or that an MFT solution isn't normally able to do, is to consume information. So if you have a service bus, you might have a situation where one application is talking to another application without any kind of triggered workflow in the middle. And you can do that with tools such as BizTalk, but that is more service bus than managed file transfer. We can do something very similar, but you would have to have some kind of logical trigger, such as you would have to scan a service bus maybe once every few seconds for a message, or you'd have to scan a directory for a file being appearing, or you'd have to have a scheduler that every minute does a specific action. So that's the only thing that generally the MFT can't do, but then, as I say, you're kind of bleeding over into what we call the service bus. Yeah, but other than that, no, you can actually, yeah, you can pretty much share the information as you want. You can consume from a RESTful API. You can post directly to a web service, and I've got some demos of that if you're interested. But yeah, it's pretty much as far as your imagination wants to take you. Okay, without going sort of too heavily into that kind of concludes the overview of what's possible. But I don't know if anybody's got any questions. Whether there's any questions on the.
It's pretty thin at the moment. So
okay. Just what the fuck? Yeah, was he talking about? Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, well that pretty much I think concludes it for an overview of what MFT is and why you would want it and what it can do for you. Okay, so okay, so I need to stop the webinar there, do I kill this?
Just ask if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, please do, yeah. Oh, something else.
You're looking at all the stuff.
Yeah, hang on, I'll just...
What do you consider as comparable software?
Well, the thing is about managed file transfer, I won't lie to you, there are some free things out there. you kind of get what you pay for. I mean, there are some open source solutions out there that maybe will do FTP management or do HTTP management, but effectively the thing is, you get to a point where it's the price against, you get what you pay for, basically. The only competitor that really is sort of directly in the same price position as Go Anywhere is a company called GlobalScape. I have a colleague that I work with that also works with what ING Bank use, and that is Axway, but Axway is sort of 10 times more expensive than what this is. There are a few things that Axway does that we can't, but equally there are quite a few things that Go Anywhere does that Axway can't. So it really depends, but there are an awful lot of products out there, but of all the ones that I've seen, I personally think this does the most of everything. Yeah. And certainly for the price point and the fact that it's so easy to set up and so easy to administer, I don't think there's really any direct competitor in this space. Yeah, it really depends on what you want though, that's the thing, because the beauty about Go Anywhere is it pretty much does some of everything. And because it's modular and because you can start off with just FTP and just a basic service, and then you can add protocols, you can add listeners, and for instance, if you have PCI DSS, we have a bidirectional application proxy, or a gateway as we call it, which allows you to create an air gap between you and the outside world, so there are no direct inbound ports to your MFT solution. And again, it really depends on how far you want to take this. Yeah. Does that answer your? Okay. The guy who just called me actually would be the one to talk to about prices, but yeah, I don't have any sort of RRP off the top of my head, but I can certainly find out for you if you want. I don't actually. Yeah, that was him. Yeah, that was him who called me that I killed it. Yeah, but, yeah. No, I think Akron's online. I don't know if he wants to reveal the price or whether he just says go. Yeah, basically the way that Go Anywhere is licensed is that a license is a license. They don't sort of do it as per one CPU or 10 users or anything like that. It's a Java virtual machine, and if you run it on this laptop or if you run it on your sort of Windows supercomputer, it's still one license. So if that Java VM would support 10,000 users on your Windows supercomputer, if there was such a thing, and I can only support 50, then effectively, as far as Linum is concerned, that's still just one license. They're also very flexible in that if you run it in a virtual machine and you need to vMotion it around and that kind of thing, then as long as you're only running the one instance that you paid for, then yeah, they don't really mind about that. They won't ask you to relicense. But they also offer a DR license, so where you pay a maintenance only, so effectively the license itself becomes free for the passive DR, but then you just pay what they call a software maintenance to give you the rights to upgrade it. But the idea is of course you only run that when you have a disaster, so it's there as a completely passive lights out license. Yeah, and yeah, that's yeah. You can have active or you can have active passive, and all that defines a cluster effectively is you have a shared file store. It doesn't really matter to us what it is. The only thing that is important is that it needs to be fast enough that it doesn't actually slow down your transfers themselves. So you could have a NAS, you could have a SAN, it could be WebDAV, it could be Amazon Bucket. It doesn't actually matter to the Java virtual machine so long as it has read-write access, and so long as all the nodes that are in the cluster can see the same thing. So if you have /data on node 1, node 2 has to see /data, and what's in there has to effectively be identical. That's the only rule. And the way that it works, it's what we call a loose application cluster. So when the thing first starts, it looks around and it says, okay, in my configuration and in the database I know about maybe 4 nodes, but I don't see any of those online. So what I will do, I will promote myself to what we call the coordinator or the leader, and all that means is that it holds logs on the database. So it kind of controls all the transactions and controls what's going on in the cluster. Any subsequent member that joins becomes a follower. Now, if for some reason the coordinator dies, they will see this in the database. They will do which effectively is a browser election, and the next one in the queue will become the coordinator, and they will hold the database logs. But other than that, they're all equal. One hasn't got more power than the other or anything like that. It's just purely so that they can coordinate and stop having a split brain. And the only other thing that you need to build the cluster is just a single port to send a heartbeat, which is effectively a ping between all the nodes. Okay. Yes. Well, that's up to you. Effectively, it's a single database, and they all, again, all they actually see is a JDBC, an IP connector. Yeah. And the IP connection allows it to connect to the database and do a SQL connect. And again, as long as every node can see the same, so if they do select asterisk from employees or whatever, they see exactly the same thing. And that, but if you want to make that a replicated database using Gluster or something like that, or Oracle Parallel Server or something like that, so long as the replication didn't make the replicant read only, or didn't make that there was a lag between the databases, what the nodes saw, then it would be happy with it. Similarly, if your tables were so big that you needed to partition them, again, it wouldn't see that. It would just see a SQL connect. Now, what you do... yeah, if you wanted to use a Rex server, yeah, I mean... yeah, because because all you're ever going to do is you're going to have a JDBC and you're going to have an IP address. And as long as that IP address is common across the whole cluster, and that as long as they can all see it, then yeah, that's fine. So you can have a single HA address, and you could have 4 or 5 database nodes if you wanted behind it. But to be honest, the database itself is quite small. All it actually holds in there is a link to the resources, to where they are, to the objects, and a link to where the project files are, and also a link to the records of the job logs of the stuff that you've actually done. It doesn't actually hold the whole job log in the database, just a pointer to the file where it is. And these things are automatically cycled round. So if you say, I only want them to live for 7 days, then it'll never get bigger than however many transfers you do in that 7 days. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yes, yeah, it can be Windows, it can be WebDAV, it can be NAS. As long as the host operating system, be it Windows or be it Linux, can produce that file store to the Java VM, so it sees a read-writable file space, then it can be an Amazon bucket, it doesn't matter. It doesn't actually see, and yeah, it's what we call below the waterline, basically. It's an application cluster, and everything, it doesn't care about anything below the waterline. Yeah? Okay. Is there anything else, or did everyone else die or go home? Or? Yeah. Okay.
So no questions from online.
Okay.
No one more in the room. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay. No. Thank you.